What did we call it? We're calling this session Another Crisis, Another Plan. I think we all work at Lincoln Public Schools because we want to educate kids. We want to make sure that we have excellent teaching and learning in this school district. And good grief, what do we spend our time on so much? We tend to spend a lot of time on emergencies, crises, unexpected situations. We are lucky in this school district in that we have an incredible group of people who are here to support us when we have things go south. And this morning we're going to have the best people that I know to work with: Joe Wright, Director of Security, Brenda Lejadro, who I have to make coordinator for LPS counselors and supervisor of LPS counselors and school social workers. And the three of us are going to walk you through a couple of real life crises so that this is what you feel like after the crises as opposed to feeling bad. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to ask for your help, and we're going to take a couple of things that actually happened. The three of us sat down and looked back this year, and we had so many things from which to choose, but we took two of what we considered to be fairly difficult moments in time. We're going to walk you through them. We're going to take each crisis and we're going to have 3 moments in time and then say to you, okay, what would you do at this point? Have you do a little bit of interaction, and then we'll talk a little bit more. We chose these 2 events largely because the people in the schools who handle these events did such an excellent job, and I want to underline that. They did an excellent job, and this is why these are good examples from which to learn. So, it's mid-morning on a school day. A North Star High School student is returning from the Career Academy and has been involved in a traffic accident. Early reports from news media indicate the student may have died. You're working in schools, you're working in departments. What at this point would you do? What would you start talking about? Call Mary Kay. That's an excellent. Or who else would you call? What else would you start thinking about?
Getting accurate information and being ready to share accurate information at the appropriate time.
Did you hear that? Getting accurate information and getting ready to share accurate information at the appropriate time. Fabulous. You can tell, good principal. Former good principal. Anything else? Joe and Brenda, what are you doing at this point?
The way this one turned out, Jane Stavum had hijacked me, and we were on our way to go check on a kid who was being cared for in a different kind of facility to make sure her needs were being met, and my phone rings on Bluetooth in my truck, and it's a sergeant for the police department, and I don't have too many secrets, so I don't shut it down or anything. I'm driving down the road with Jane, and it's the sergeant at the scene, and you can tell he's on his radio mic, and he's looking at that time at the scene. He can see an ID on a kid, and he knows the end result. So he's telling me right now, here's what you have coming at you. I'm telling you as soon as I can, that this is what's going to happen for the day. And not that any of this is funny, but I grab a notebook and give it to Jane and give her a pen and say, start writing this down. Make sure you write the times down of everything you're doing. And she's kind of looking at me like, I didn't sign up for this today. But, here we go, right? So right then we knew we've got something that's not going to go right.
Mm-hmm. At about that same time, a news reporter from the Journal Star arrives on the scene. And so I was sitting at my desk, and my phone vibrated with an alert that a student has been killed. So that's the first I heard of it. And at the same time I'm reading that, my phone rings, and it's Russ. Russ has been in communication with Joe and says, we've got a likely student death. We need to activate the crisis team. So the crisis team will always respond when there's a student death or a faculty member death. And occasionally there will be other times when the crisis team would respond. But please keep in mind the message we want to communicate is that the crisis team is there to help and support. whether you think that it requires a full-scale team to come out and help with a response, or whether you just want to consult with somebody who is very familiar with grief processes and communication around death and dying. So one takeaway from today is absolutely the crisis team is there to support you. So my role in that was to contact the crisis team leader, who is Ursula Vernon Hansen. She's one of our social workers, and she's been in the district a number of years. Ursula is just a fabulous person to work with. So I got a hold of Ursula and said, we don't know for sure the details, but please let your team know that we will be needing to have a response. Not sure how large at this point, but have them on standby. The crisis team is made up of 24 professionals from the areas of school social work, school counseling, school psychology, and nurses. And so each team is 8 members strong, and each team is active 1 per month. So they rotate a little bit. We try not to use the same team every time there's a crisis. So Ursula got on the phone and let the team that was on call know to be on standby. So that way they could notify their principals and say, you know, I'm not sure what's going down yet, but I probably will need to be called out for today. So at that point, we're just on standby because we have the information, but we don't have a lot of details yet.
And at this point, thanks to Joe, who has these fabulous connections with the Lincoln Police Department, we do know that a student has died. So if you envision what's happening back at district office, we start pulling a team together. Joe wasn't there, but we were connected with him. We have Brenda, we have Russ Ewing, who's the Director of Student Services. We'll often have either Pat or Cindy from instruction. And then on the phone, we will almost have the principal involved. Now, this was an unusual case on lots of levels. One, it happened during a class day. A lot of times those traffic accidents happen at night, so we have some time. We actually have a little bit of time to process. In this case, it is happening real time in the morning. Secondly, it involves more than one school. So we're talking to Dan Hohensee at the Career Academy, and we're talking to Van, thank you, at North Star, both of whom are pretty upset because they have, in essence, lost a student. So we're all talking, and what we're talking about at this point, along with security and crisis team, is who are we going to have to share this message with? Who are all the different audiences? Staff members in our school, students, families. We're going to have to deal with news media. And also while we're talking, we're furiously looking up on Synergy, does this student have brothers and sisters at other schools? And so we're looking at all the possible permutations of all the different principals and schools that we might have to notify, start a Google Doc, and start all those possible messages that we're going to have to send out with all of us adding to those messages. So all those things are happening.
Actually, the first communication that usually goes out, whether kind of I get it from outside or someone else gets it from outside, or you're calling us, we like you to contact me or Brenda, Russ, Mary Kay, but I'm a good person to contact first because I put out what we call the exec message. So it's a small group of people who kind of are connected to everything in the district. Imagine in a situation like this, Eric Weber, head of HR, this really isn't, secondarily or connected maybe, but it's not really an HR issue. It does involve an employee, but Eric wants to know what's going on in the district. He's a associate superintendent, so the people that maybe won't be involved or we don't think involved right away, but the people who need to know when there's a big deal going on, I send that message out right away. So if you're the person experiencing the issue and you want to make sure you contact all the right people, you've got a lot going on, and you really don't need to stop and think, oh no, am I going to get in trouble because I forgot to call somebody? So if you call me or us and let me put out that exec message, then you're covered. You're good to go. Now you just need to work with the people you need to work with, and we'll guide you through that. But you don't need to worry about, oh geez, I should have called so-and-so and I didn't, now I'm going to get jammed up, because we've taken care of that for you.
That's one of the themes that you'll hear again and again. We're trying to let you do what you need to do, and we're trying to take away, we'll create the messages for you, we'll help with crisis response. We are, later on, we're going to try and get media away from you as best we can because we want to be there to support you. So now, news accounts are now appearing on news sites. We haven't told very many people officially anything, but news reports are starting to say, what did they say early? Did it say an LPS student? An LPS student has been killed. Before we know it, this one went fast. They're reporting that a student has indeed died and another is injured. So, what are you thinking at this point? What would be next steps?
Just tell people that we haven't received an official statement yet from LPS, or if people are asking for information, just haven't received an official statement yet, or we're not making any official statements, or something like that, maybe?
She's saying, is it time to say we're not making any official statements? And we're going to talk about that. Joe, once upon a time, in La La Land, we would wait for the Lincoln Police Department to officially release the name. And why don't you talk a little bit about that? That's tricky.
You know, we certainly don't want to be the deliverer of official news in something like this because it's a police death investigation. It's really not in our wheelhouse, and we aren't the ones in charge of that investigation. So we really need to be told by police that this is the case, and that they're only going to release to other people once parents or family, the correct notifications have been made. And then also because we're talking about an accidental death of a minor, there is not going to be a press release on this. There is no public notification that this has happened. They'll talk to parents when they can find them, but we found out ahead of the parents now. So in this case, the police aren't going to make an official notification that then we can move from. It's not a green light for us to go ahead because they aren't going to say it out loud, even when they contact the parents. So we're stuck with what is our messaging going to be in this case, because we can't say out loud what we know has happened.
So in this particular case, this was an interesting one on so many levels. Do you want to talk about the way that the mom...
So the mom heard via social media and got some calls because so many people had heard, the telephone game had heard about this. So she called the school because that was her contact. Her trust relationship was to call North Star, and I'm standing next to Van, and the SRO is there, who also confirmed the name of the student. So we knew for sure that this student had passed away, and the mom was asking Van. No better person to have on, that was hard on Van. I think it took a couple of years off her life, but what other person would you want right there, right then? And Van looked at me like, what do I do? And really at that point, Van, we know for sure that happened. Mom is reaching out. You don't want to do this on the telephone ever, but you're painted into a corner of the room there. So I just put my hand on Van's shoulder and said, do it. So Van, flat-footed, had to tell a mom that her kid was dead.
And there's so many, I know Steve Joel this morning talked about the whole addition of social media and the speed with which information spreads these days. And another layer of this incident was the Journal-Star, who was on the scene early, took a picture of the crash. Now, they didn't identify the student, but the mom saw the picture of the crash online and identified her child's car. So there are just so many layers of everything is happening so fast. Once upon a time, we would have been waiting for the police to say, here's who passed away, and we may have said, we're not going to say anything right now. We believe in this day and age that if we want to have an opportunity to have the crisis team talk to kids, if we want an opportunity to share those messages to our families, we often have to take the first step. So we often now, it's a lot of times it's Joe, sometimes it's a principal, we check with the parents, with the family, and say, is it okay to share this name because it's already out there? So it's a different protocol than we had once upon a time.
So we lost track of Mom because we didn't know where she was. She'd changed jobs. The cops couldn't find her. We didn't know where she was. She called Van, but then we lost track of her there. Not a lot of time to process. So some officers helped me figure out who the stepdad was who lived in town. And they went out to notify him and then asked if I could talk to him Luckily, he had been a Cass County Deputy Sheriff for a while, so he'd done a lot of death notifications. It was kind of midbrain for him. He knew what was going on. So I asked him permission, and not knowing that then, or just figuring out, I knew that it'd be a lot easier. I said, hey, there's a process to follow that we help our students and staff work through this, but to help them work through it, we need to make an announcement to them that this has happened. Is that okay with you? And we were so lucky that he had kind of been in that world before, and he understood how that could really help other people. And he said, go ahead, green light. You know, you can imagine another parent who'd never been in that world, who had just lost a kid. They may say, hold on, I don't want you going there. So we were very lucky that he understood what a process that, like Brenda leads, can do to help this with the situation. The problem was by the time we got to this, we were pretty late in the day.
Yeah. This accident happened as the students were going back to their home school from the first session at the Career Academy. So this was around 10:30 in the morning. So there were students from North Star who were returning on the bus to North Star, and students who were driving their own vehicles and who drove past the accident site. So there was already a lot of information out with the students. So we knew we needed to get things moving pretty quickly and craft a message that would be a very similar message to several audiences. So we first wanted to let the staff know what was happening. So Mary Kay mentioned a Google Doc. What happens when we start the crisis team process is we build a Google Doc and then invite the principal and what we call the central response team, which is just that group of us here at the district office, along with the crisis team leaders. So we've got a lot of eyes looking at the message and trying to read it from different perspectives, and that's one of the things that has been so valuable with communications involvement. They see things from more of a media message, and the school people involved, the principal sees things from a student and parent perspective. The crisis team views it from a best practice in terms of grief support, and Mary Kay and her team view it from a perspective of what does the general public need and want to know. We know that any message that goes out becomes immediately public. So a message that goes to staff may end up on Channel 8 or Channel 10. It just happens, even if we
In fact, it may
ask.
not. It almost always does anymore.
Right, even if we ask staff not to share it. So that's a pretty common thing to do, is to say, staff, this is a message just for you, please don't share this, but always be aware that there may be somebody who shares it anyway. We use language that is accurate, to the best of our knowledge, truthful, and honest. So we don't use words like passed away, we use died. And some people really have a hard time with that, and I'll tell you, the people who mostly have a hard time are principals, because it sounds so harsh to say, my student died. That's hard to say. But that's the language that's the most helpful, and it's a consistent language. So we don't make up different euphemisms to cover what happened. Just to divert a little bit, the same is true with suicide. If we know that a student probably died by suicide, it's in everybody's best interest to use the word suicide. A parent suicide if it's still under investigation. But imagine high school students who think that you've been hiding something from them. And that's what we really can't do. We need to be honest, and we need to be open and share the information that's appropriate and truthful. So those are sometimes very hard things for principals to do, and having a few other people involved and supportive in that process makes a huge difference. So the message often starts by the principal writing a few lines, and then other people jump into that Google Doc and change a few words, add a few sentences, get it ready to go. And the order of communication is typically staff, students, parents, and often very close together.
Close together.
So there may be only a couple minutes between messages, just because that's it's going to get out there no matter what. It's important to let the students know first, families know second, but keep that time frame very close together. In this case, staff knew ahead of students. We didn't make an announcement to students until a little later in the day when the crisis team was able to get there. So staff knew right around lunchtime, a little before lunchtime, and the crisis team arrived about 1:15. And so they were there the rest of the afternoon and the next day.
And we'll talk with the principal. We don't always make announcements to students, but in cases like this, we do. So we work with the principal. What time of day is the I'm not really best, but the least worst time to actually stop your school and have everybody read a statement about what happened. So I always say it's like a choreographing how we're going to do those waves of messages.
And inside that staff message, I've even seen principals say, okay, I need to think about the teachers, the 7 teachers who have this kid, because not only are they affected, but they have the class that this kid was in, so maybe they need an extra push on messaging or some extra coaching to get ready for delivering that message, because they've got that kid's buddies, in that class.
And that's where the crisis team is also very helpful, because a crisis team member can go be with that teacher when the message is delivered. So an 8-person crisis team usually means that there are enough crisis team members to be in those classrooms and support the teacher as the news is delivered. It's helpful for kids to hear from people that they know and they're comfortable with. So if a teacher can deliver the message, that's the best. If the teacher really feels that they can't, then the crisis team member is there to deliver the message and provide support to kids right away.
Quick lessons learned. The one that I do want to underline, I know we need to move quickly, and I tell people we need to move quickly, especially when we've got news reporters knocking on our door, but I do want to add thoughtfully in there. I always want to remember thoughtfully. So if it takes a couple of extra minutes to make it thoughtful, then let's take those couple extra minutes, even though we need to be quick. And Brenda, next steps.
Okay, so the principal, after a death has occurred, should either him or herself or designate a person in the building to be the contact person with the family to help communicate with them when the services will be, provide any other support to family members that they know about. In some cases, there's a teacher who is that natural conduit, but often it falls to the principal, and that's probably one of the hardest roles a principal ever has to take on, is communicating with that family. But that's really important. So communicating with the family, kind of keeping them up to speed on what messages have gone out to students and families so that they aren't blindsided by what's been happening. And then make a plan for who from the school will attend the service. Keep in mind that if you don't have enough subs within your building to cover staff who want to attend, you can contact HR and we'll put together a group of people. HR will help put together a group of people to come out and cover for that. So that's something that we want to show support to the family there. After the death of a student, there is often a time when memorials start popping up. Students will spontaneously put flowers at a locker. They'll go out to the crash site and construct a kind of an area for a vigil. Those are all things that are understandable why students want to do it, but we really want to try to help manage that for safety reasons, as well as to make sure that we don't glorify the death of a student. There are 2 tenets that the crisis team operates under. The first is that we never want to make death seem attractive to anybody. And the second is we want to treat all deaths the same. So whether it was a death by cancer, a death by suicide, a death by a car wreck, a death of a student is a death of a student, and we want to respond in the same fashion. So those are 2 things to kind of keep in mind as you think about crisis response and how things play out in the building. A memorial kind of area could be set aside in the counseling office or in another private location so that students who want to come and write messages of support to a family can do that in a private space. But please, locker memorials and things like that need to be monitored, and students who seem to be in extreme distress should be sent to somebody to talk to, either a counselor or social worker in the building, psychologist who's there regularly, or one of the crisis team members, just to maintain that presence, of support and help, but in an appropriate way so that it doesn't become an attention seeking way to memorialize this person.
We have another one that we can walk through very quickly, but I do want to pause. Are there questions at this point?
I'd just like to say that, reiterate the importance of using the crisis team, because as a principal in a building, you're closely connected to the situation. You're emotional and you don't always think clearly when you're emotional, and so it's nice to have access to others to get their thoughts.
Yeah, and it's so nice that just a step removed, you know, that extra support is so good.
Every school, every principal has wonderful plans in place, and then when it happens to you, it feels so different. And we have great principals because they care so much, but what happens is they care so much, and so it's so helpful to have other people helping you walk through it. Let's do this one fast. This one is interesting because this was a dramatic case, but I think that it's not unusual for any of us to deal with a staff member who might be in trouble in some way. So this one is, again, this was one of our more dramatic cases this year. Your school is notified that one of your staff members is under investigation for allegedly sexually assaulting a student. What do you do at this point? Call Joe. You guys are really good. Let's have Joe talk about this one. This was
The really hard part about this, there were some really hard decisions about this one. The student he wasn't convicted. So do we say allegedly assaulted?
allegedly at this point.
Okay. At that point, employee allegedly assaulted the student. So we immediately have the responsibility, as we find out through counselor to us, that we have to notify law enforcement. That's done. However, the investigation is ongoing. And there's a way to investigate a crime where you don't want the suspect to know that he is under investigation. You want to do some things before he finds out that he's under investigation. So that means that some people in your school need to know what's going on, because you need to create a protective system for the child and other kids not to be victimized. However, you can't let, think of the telephone game inside of school employees, you can't let that suspect know at the request of the police that he's under suspicion. So you really have to partition who you're going to talk to.
This was again, they're all tricky, I guess, in their own way. And I know we have to keep moving through this one. But at this point, not a lot of people know. That doesn't mean that the team behind the scenes isn't meeting, already identifying, okay, what are all the audiences that we're going to need to identify on this one? How are we going to use the crisis response team? Interesting audiences, like in this particular case, the student was on an athletic team. So we knew we were going to have to deal with talking separately to that athletic team. So you have to think, when you have all these people around the table, you're thinking, what are all the different groups of people that we're going to have to create different messages for? And like I said, I'm going to move quickly through this one. So you've worked with the police, pieces are in place, the staff member is being charged later today. And the reason I want to talk about this just briefly is when I talk about choreography, we had choreographed all the timing and how everything was going to take place. We had this great plan that totally fell apart because, 30 seconds after he got charged, the principal called us and said, we had somebody call the school and say, we just heard that the staff member got charged. I mean, we never thought it would happen. How do people find out that fast?
John Sundermeyer was outside the house because we knew what was going on, and he called and said, okay, the cops are going, okay, they're leaving with him. I mean, he had just been arrested, so then we thought, okay, we've got a clock, we've got a little bit of time here to start our cascade of messaging, but that time lasted not too long, about 30 seconds.
We were all sitting in Russ Ewing's office, and when the principal said, I just got my first phone call, we just went, wow. For me, that was a light bulb moment about how fast things happen anymore, and it certainly changes my sense of how fast we need to be ready to message. Because, again, I do not want a parent learning that something happened at their child's school on KFOR radio. I think that's the worst thing that can happen. So one of our main goals is we need to be out there ahead, sharing information. We want you to know this, please. We're a caring, wonderful school district, which we are. We want you to know this ahead of time. Do you want to talk about crisis response in this one? It was important.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Just remember that even the suspect has a spouse
Who works
and
at LPS?
children all connected to LPS. So there's an audience connected on an access to each of those people as well.
So we're sending messages to the principal at the spouse's school. We're sending messages to the principal if there's siblings that attend their school. So all of these are going out. They went out, boom, 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 boom. Then you keep your ear to the ground and you figure out, okay, what is going on out there and how much conversation is going on. And in this particular case, it elevated very fast. And so we ended up doing a press conference, which is unusual for us. But again, in some cases, when you've got a principal saying, I'm getting a lot of phone calls and all the people at district office are getting a lot of phone calls, then you know that you have to go the next step. Okay, we actually are going to have a press conference. Joe, John, Steve, Eric Weber all stood in this room, more media than I care to believe can be in this room, and we shared openly, honestly, transparently everything that we knew and everything that we were doing. I think that's so important that this school district is so willing to do that. I never hear people say, oh no, we can't say that, unless it's a privacy issue. So it felt like we were trying to cover every base we could.
And I'll just say that one of the big things that an administrator in the building does is keep their finger on the pulse of the emotions of the school. So if it starts to feel like things are escalating and the mental health staff in the building is struggling to maintain, that's when a crisis team can respond as well. So it's not simply the death of a student or staff member, but in these kinds of situations, some extra support to talk through difficult things with kids is a positive thing that the crisis team can provide as well.
And I know this year we've had cases where a staff member had their third DUI. So in those cases, we have to do certain things, but there are different levels of responses depending on what's going on. This one is a fairly significant one. Any questions about this one and more on a staff member side? Some very quick tips. Anybody want to add anything? What I like to underline is when possible, I can talk, I'm the communications person, but in all honesty, you are the best people. You are the best spokespeople, ambassadors for Lincoln Public Schools. So certainly it's easy to be an ambassador when there's time to share good news, but when there's a time to share not so great news, you are still the best people. You care. You know about the school district and you know about your staff members and your students. So when possible, you are the best people to help us write those messages. Often we'll be writing the messages in the Google Doc and the principal will have a little, oh, you can't do that for this reason, and we'll go, good. That's why you're there to share that. Or Joe will say, well, for security issues, you can't say that, so we all have our voices. I do want to underline what Brenda mentioned. When we write messages anymore that go out to families, say it's a high school, messages go out to 2,000 families. I know that's going to land with news media, and I know that when I'm writing a message for families anymore, I'm writing a news release. So that's why it's nice to have communications people there saying, woo, how is that going to sound? How is that going to play in the news? That is all we have to say. Any questions on how you handle a crisis, or are you all now ready?
What are some of the takeaways that you have from
Takeaways
today?
that you have. Got 1 minute. Call Joe.
Call Joe.
I think what was a lesson I've seen kind of learned, and it's through horrible events, but in this case and in a couple others, I come from a different world, and Tim was talking about how connected schools are to kids. Schools are, and all of you are victimized when something like this happens, and you all feel horrible. And I think we have a lot of discipline because the message, I think, and what we've done is, yeah, we feel that way, but this young lady was the victim, and we can't send a message that we have been harmed, you know, because this is her victimization, and that really takes some objective language and thinking, even though we feel so badly, to make sure the tone of the message goes out right. So it's nice to have really smart, objective people from all directions look at those messages to make sure the tone, word choice, just down to the comma, is really what we want to say. And we've had a message ready to go that's just perfect, and then somebody says, you know, hold it. We got to change that word. And oh my God, I'm glad you found that, you know. And so a team of a lot of people, a lot of eyes on a message really makes a difference.
Your most important takeaway is we are all here to help you. Thank you all for coming.